The big story, though, today has been another big focus on the economy. The ASX shedding, well, about 2% today, 2.1% down at the start of the day. At the moment, it's tracking at 2%, a two-day total of 3.6%. About $70 billion wiped off the value of the ASX 200, mainly because rumblings out of the US and bad data, worse than expected jobs figures and manufacturing figures as well. This is concern that the trade war between the US and China is impacting the US now, continuing to, and possible concerns of of some sort of recession in the future as well. So, amidst all of that, what should the response from the government be? Joining me here in Geelong, one of the local MPs, Richard Marles, and of course the Deputy Labor Leader. Thanks for your time today.
Pleasure, Tom. Welcome to Geelong.
Good to be here, and another cracking day we should mention as well.
Well, this is the way the weather is always in this town.
Another sunny 29-degree day. What about the markets? Do you accept this seems to be mainly global jitters and US data causing the ASX downturn?
Obviously, all of that plays its part, but we've also got a government which is asleep at the wheel in terms of managing our economy. You know, we've got record low wage growth, record low productivity, low growth. We've seen this week the Reserve Bank take interest rates down to historic low levels, a crisis cut down to 0.75%, much less than what existed during the global financial crisis. And in the face of all of this, we hear nothing from the government in terms of a plan for the economy, and all of that very much predates, the issues that have arisen in the last little while.
Labor's been talking about stimulus. Is there one particular measure you're going to try to push the government to do?
Well, firstly, the government is the government. They won the election on May 18, and there's no chance of us being the government until 2022. So ultimately, these are questions for them to answer. But we've been encouraging the government to look at infrastructure as an area where they could bring some projects forward, but we've heard nothing from them in terms of that. And instead, what we've got is a government which, is happy to celebrate what it thinks it's done, but is absolutely doing nothing to help people in this country face the very difficult choices they have when they go to the supermarket to not buy the products that they can't buy with the money they don't have.
Labor's been talking about New Start as well. Is there a figure you're saying that it should be lifted by, and do you accept it's a bit tricky because it's not a one-off? You would bake that into every year from here until eternity.
Yeah, but New Start's too low, and that's the point that we're making, and it needs to be looked at.
What's an affordable increase?
Yeah, well, again, that is really a question for the government, and the government need to address this. But the point we've been making from, since the election and before, is that New Start is too low, that in order to try and live on that amount, it is very difficult indeed, and we need to be dealing with it.
Would you put a figure on it, though?
Well, it's for the government to come forward and explain what increase there should be on New Start and what it intends to do. But what we can identify right here, and we can say this from opposition, is New Start is too low and the government needs to act.
The other thing the government doesn't want to do is not pay off the debt it's planning to over future years. So what about a one-off payment and the cheques that were sent out under Labor? Could that be a good one-off stimulus measure?
Well, we would like to hear what the government has planned in terms of dealing with the economy right now. The economy is experiencing low growth, and we all know that we've seen record low wage growth, and that's not just been the last few months, that's persisted for many years now.
What I just want to say is, so Labor often says, well, you helped Australia avoid the GFC. One of the measures was sending out cheques to a whole host of people, including pensioners, for example, to actually spend the money. Do you think that worked, and should that be considered if things get worse?
Well, I think what Labor did during the global financial crisis was appropriately calibrated and was very successful in getting Australia through that period without going into recession, and indeed the measures that we took at that time were lauded around the world as being best practice.
Including that particular one?
Including that particular... But right now, in terms of these circumstances, it is a matter for the government to come up with its plan. It is the one sitting on the Treasury benches. But what we know is there needs to be a plan, and right now we're not seeing one.
I want to ask about the 70th commemoration of the Chinese Communist Party. During this week, the ambassador has come out and said there's no intention to seek hegemony, to seek expansion or spheres of influence. Is that an accurate statement?
Well, China is a complex question. That's the first point to make. You know, what has really struck me in terms of the commentary over the last week is the desire from so many to try and see this through a binary light and to either put a white or a black hat on China. And if you're going to do that, you will fail in terms of trying to understand the way forward in terms of our relationship with China and where China is going. I think from Australia's point of view, what we can control, we need, as I've been saying for a long time now, to find the leadership side of our international personality. We need to be playing bigger. And that means in the context of our relationship with China, it actually means in the context of our alliance with the United States. And it means in terms of the place that or the role that we play in our immediate region in the Pacific. And whatever China's aspirations are, and you'll get a whole range of views about that, the best way for us to deal with it is if we are playing much bigger.
But this is the ambassador saying what China's aspirations are. I'm just asking if you believe that to be accurate.
Well, I take the Chinese ambassador for what he's saying, but it's really important in terms of wherever China is going at this moment in time, that we are playing as big as we can. But let me just make this point, Tom.
Yeah.
I do think that what we are seeing is a much more assertive China, and particularly under President Xi. And that does give rise to as challenging a set of strategic circumstances as Australia has really faced.
But isn't it clearly also an expansionist China, one that is seeking spheres of influence, including in our region? I mean, the comment from the ambassador just seems to fly in the face of everything China's actually doing.
Well, as I say, I think we are seeing a much more assertive China under President Xi, and I think that is clearly a factor in terms of the strategic landscape that Australia faces. And as I've just said, I think it's as complex and difficult a strategic landscape as any we've faced since the Second World War. Ultimately, the question has to be, what is our response to that? You know, how do we deal with that? And my point is that we need to be playing as big as we can, making sure that we do find that leadership side of our international personality and getting these questions right. And that does include making sure that we get the diplomacy right with China itself.
One of the things you suggested was closer defence ties with China. In terms of closer, would that be limited to more peacekeeping and disaster operations, or are you talking about something else, exercises perhaps?
I'm thinking about exercises, but it's off a low base, and it needs to be put in context here, Tom. There is no trust that I can tell in terms of the relationship that currently exists between China and Australia, and that is something that we need to build. That is patently obvious. Now, the military-to-military relationship that exists between Australia and China, actually in the context of the entire relationship, is one of the better places. We currently do exercises with the Chinese military, exercise Pandaroo. There is a regular high-level dialogue between the Chief of the Defence Force of the ADF and the senior leadership of the Chinese military. And so really the point I'm making is, you know, in a world where we are seeking to build more trust, where that would be a good thing to do, part of the relationship which is going better than other parts is worth leveraging off, and defence is one of them.
What message, though, does it send to seek those closer defence ties and military exercises at the same time as China is being so aggressive in the South China Sea, something we disagree with? Well,
I think we've got to be very clear about our messages, but also go back to that point. This is complex, and you can't simply put either a black or a white hat on China.
But isn't that a case of saying, well, here are our words, but the actions are speaking louder by seeking closer cooperation? We're saying something in one sense and doing another?
No, it's building the full range of the relationship. So we must build a relationship where we have an ability to, and the courage to express Australia's national interest where that differs from Chinese action. And we need to be doing that, and I've been very forceful about the fact that Australia needs to exercise its voice and actions which back that voice up in respect of that. South China Sea being an example of that.
What are the actions?
But can I just? But at the same time,
South China Sea.
But at the same time, Tom, we engage with China. Like, we are engaging with them. It's not an option to decouple. And given that we are engaging with China, it is self-evident that what we then need to do in the same breath as being able to have those conversations and express our view is to also engage in action which builds trust. Now, there's a whole range of ways in which you can build trust, but I do think, the existing military exercises that are happening under this government are doing that, and I think there is space for some more of that. It's off a low base.
From where China sits, though, what are the consequences in terms of actions for what it does in the South China Sea if we then increase military cooperation?
Well, I don't think there are any consequences in that sense. I think what matters is that we are in a position where we have the courage to express our national interest, and that we are very clear with China about that. And I've certainly have sought to be that in the comments that I've made previously, and would encourage the government to do the same. But that does not then mean that you don't seek to engage with China, because clearly we are engaging with China. We have a free trade agreement with China.
And you engaged recently as well on a trip there. You said that you raised the issue of Uyghurs when you were in China. What was the response?
Well, it's the response that China has given, and I'll let China give its response, but it's the standard response that China gives.
Was it along the lines of them saying that it's just training, it's about counter-terror?
It's the response that China gives, and I'll let China give it. I do think I think it's really important. I think that there are real human rights questions in respect of the way in which China is treating its Uyghur population.
Are they questions or human rights being trampled upon?
I think human rights are being trampled upon, and deep concerns about that, which is why... But let me finish, Tom, which is why I raised it. I and I think Australia and the global community, I think, have genuine anxieties and concerns about the way that population is being treated, and it's very important that in the context of the relationship that we have with China, we speak up about that, which is why I did it.
And we're talking about millions of people. Is there a red line here that China really shouldn't cross?
Oh, well, China... The treatment of the Uyghurs in China, I think, is a major problem and needs to change. And that is the position that is held across most of the global community. And we need to have the courage to advocate on behalf of that in the context of our relationship with China. And I did. And I did in a speech in Beijing itself.
But your response that you got back was something along the lines of...
Well, and I'm not pretending...
No one seems to believe within intelligence and so on.
And I'm not pretending, Tom, that my raising this issue in one speech in Beijing is going to solve the problem. I do, however, think that it is really important that the global community continues to raise this issue. I think it makes a difference that we raise the issue. I think the Uyghur population want us to raise the issue. And I think ultimately there is some form of sensitivity that China feels in respect of this. So I absolutely believe in the importance of continuing to raise this.
Is it really having an impact with China?
Well, it's not the impact that we would want in the sense that the situation in respect of the Uyghurs hasn't changed.
Okay.
But I do think it is really important that advocacy continues.
The phone call between Donald Trump and Scott Morrison, that was fleshed out yesterday with David Spears on Sky News. Were you satisfied with the explanation from the Prime Minister?
No.
What was missing?
Well, it is an unusual event. To have a request of this kind of assistance and cooperation being made from leader...
Donald Trump's pretty unusual.
He is, from leader to leader. But I put it in those terms because the idea from our Prime Minister that this is a kind of a routine conversation, I don't think is right. In respect of that request, it's very unclear to me exactly what the Prime Minister has done. I mean, on Tuesday, the Prime Minister's office put out a statement saying that in the conversation they said they would meet that request. So exactly what the Prime Minister has done is very unclear.
Well, he's saying the request was to allow agency-to-agency contact, if you like. Yes, we'll facilitate what we said we'd do in May about providing information.
Well, I think there are a whole lot more questions that have been raised here than those that have been answered. Well, in the statement that the Prime Minister made on Tuesday, he said that they were agreeing to participate in cooperating in this investigation. Well, what does that mean?
Well, hasn't he just said that mean... Well, we know essentially it won't mean diplomatic cables being revealed, that Alexander Downer may well be called upon, but he's already given evidence to the FBI?
Well, it might be clear to you. It's very unclear to me exactly what cooperation was intended here.
Is there cooperation that shouldn't go ahead? Where would you draw the line?
Well, there are... Firstly, this is obviously a domestic matter in the United States. That's the first thing. There are protocols about how our agencies work together in criminal investigations, for example, and there are means by which requests are made from agency to agency or department to department. It's very unusual that it occurs leader to leader. So, I mean, there is a normal course of events here which would play out, which is not what's being described in terms of the way in which the request was made by Donald Trump.
Decided to make the call, which Scott Morrison can't help. Has he done anything wrong yet in terms of cooperation?
Well, I accept that it begins with a request from Donald Trump. The Prime Minister on Tuesday made it clear that he was going to cooperate with that request. That's what that statement made. That's what that statement said, that coming out of the Prime Minister's office on Tuesday.
But what we know is the request from the detail yesterday was in fact just to link up agencies. So what's wrong with that?
Well, I don't think that's clear at all. I mean, that's not clear at all from what has come out in relation to the request that was made by Donald Trump.
Okay.
We need to know exactly what was it that Donald Trump said and what was the reply that the Prime Minister gave. And I think that would clear it up if we could be very clear about what words were said.
Can I ask you finally, Ed Husic has told Sky News this afternoon that Donald Trump is not a friend of Australia. Do you agree?
Look, I mean, firstly, Ed is very much entitled to his view, and I very much respect Ed. The alliance between Australia and the United States is the most significant relationship that we have, the most significant bilateral relationship. It is the cornerstone of our national security. It is the cornerstone of our national security, and in that sense, America is very much our best friend. Now, I absolutely respect the office of the President of the United States in the context of that friendship, and Donald Trump is the President.
And you do, so he is a friend of Australia?
Well, I think Donald Trump would describe himself as a friend of Australia, but I respect Donald Trump as the President of the United States.
You said respect, but is he a friend of Australia?
Well, I think he's a friend of Australia, but I respect Donald Trump as the President of the United States, and I respect that office in the context of the most important relationship that our country has.